Hello and welcome. You are listening to an episode of the Sales Chat Show. To stream or download a host of further free episodes that will power your sales success, please visit saleschatshow.com. We really hope that you enjoy and benefit from this episode. Hello folks, and welcome to another episode of the Sales Chat Show, saleschatshow.com, driving your sales forward once more by the miracle of modern technology. The Sales Chat Show team have assembled. We can't gather in person because of what's been going on, but we are meeting together virtually to record this episode thanks to the technical wizardry of Mr. Graham Jones. And so thank you, Graham, for your technical wizardry. This episode is called Are You Missing the Alarm Signals on Your Business Dials by Focusing on the Wrong Thing? And Phil, you inspired this by telling us about an article you were reading in the paper, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, and you're absolutely right. This is an article written in the Sunday Times by Matthew Saeed, and he starts his article by saying that on the 29th of December 1972, Eastern Airlines 401 took off from New York bound for Miami. The flight was without incident until the plane began its descent and the pilot pulling the lever to lower the wheels. Then a problem emerged. A light that should have illuminated to show that the front wheel was down failed to do so. This either meant that the wheel was not down at all or there was a problem with the light, and the pilot placed the aircraft into a holding pattern whilst they hunted for the problem. And basically they pulled the light from the fitting, blew off to remove the dust, blah, blah, blah. And what they hadn't realized is that the plane was dropping 1,750 feet and the altitude alarm sounded, but it was too late. The plane crashed and it killed 101 people. The moral of that story is that by focusing on one issue, they had ignored other fatal issues. And Matthew Saeed goes on to explain that the current coronavirus, and this is where it gets a little bit political, he is critical of the government for focusing on flu pandemics in their preparation and planning, particularly the 1957 and the 1968 flu pandemics in Asia and Hong Kong. And what they didn't do was to focus on coronavirus, evidenced through the likes of SARS and MERS. So the reason why I thought this would be an interesting one is that businesses now are starting to return to work, and that will happen over the next 2 to 6 months. And the risk, of course, is that businesses start to focus on implications of the coronavirus, whereas there might be other stuff going on in their businesses with its structure, its finances, its customer base, or whatever, that are more important and potentially more damaging. So by focusing on how do we go back to work after the virus, they might actually be missing other more lethal forces at work. So that's my intro.
Okay, so we're talking here that if understandably, say, a sales director has their focus on one or two things that are sort of looming large on their priority list, that they're giving less attention to other areas that could have a pretty nasty effect if they're neglected.
Yeah, and I think for some of our listeners who are familiar with the good old SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, Matthew Saeed's article, I think, signals a return to that type of thinking where you might carry out an analysis of the whole business. And on a previous episode, we've talked about building a little matrix built around the likely probability of an event happening and the damage that it might cause. And we've pointed out previously that businesses need to be looking at events that are highly likely to happen with a high damaging impact if they did. And that analysis, again, would be across the whole business, not just based around, now that we're back at work, how do we get over this virus, which is the risk.
Yeah, I'm interested. It would be interesting to see if, understandably, I don't wish to sound critical, if understandably sales directors, etc., will be focused on some more short-term time horizons at the moment. And that often happens anyway, pre-coronavirus, with a quarter focus, and then less focus is on medium and longer term, for example, account development or customer development, and that I think could be. I think shorter term thinking is far more likely to be prevalent at the moment, which means, are you neglecting the longer term? So what's your short term, medium term, long term? Having a think of at least some time thinking about that, I guess.
I think if I was a sales director or a chief executive, I'd be asking the rather brave question, which is, what were the things that were wrong with our business before this virus hit?
Yes.
Because the chances are they're still wrong. They might have actually got worse.
Well, also, I guess they could be magnified, couldn't they, by what's been happening or what's been going on. And I think I know
exactly.
I know from sort of personal experience of being involved in, say, when an organisation has a reorganisation, when they make some changes internally to structure or downsize or whatever. Everybody's focus goes internally inside the organisation, and they neglect the outside, which can often involve the customer, which I think makes you very vulnerable to attack. You've got yourself focused inside on how we're dividing up the sales territories and all of this stuff, and your competitors are going, oh, hello, this is a fantastic opportunity to go and attack your customers. So yeah, it's a threat, I think. And we were talking before we came on air for this around having sort of like a I suppose a dashboard, isn't it, of things to pay attention to. With the plane analogy, they were focusing on one warning light, I suppose, on the dashboard, and they weren't paying attention to the others. What's your thinking, chaps, on what sort of things might somebody want to have on their dashboard so that they can shift their frame of reference?
The one thing that pilots have, of course, is audible signs now. So not only do they have, flashing things and visual things on their dashboard, but they miss them, and so they have to have audible things. So they've got two sensory inputs, and so one of the things that we have these days, we're doing everything online, is that we've only got one input, and we can also decide what to put on those dashboards. So what happens is you get a dashboard in a CRM system, and somebody in your sales team doesn't like that particular dial, so they switch it off. Because and so it's a bit like the pilot going, well, I don't like those screens over on that side of the plane, so I'll put sticky tape over the top so I can't see them. So you've got to have control over the dashboards that you have, and everybody has to see them. But just having visual signals is no good. We need other things that grab people's attention. So that means having annoying pop-ups that come up with a sound when something happens, like you've neglected a client for a month or something. And so because you've been so focused on developing new business, you've forgotten to keep in touch with an existing client. And so, but that needs audible alarms to you. So what I think some of the things is that the people who establish these CRM style dashboards in businesses need to think about what kind of signals do we need to give to people, and how do we give them in multiple sensory ways so that they can't miss them. Because the problem with the pilot was they didn't have a signal. They had a visual sign that the altitude was changing, but there was nothing else telling them that. And so they were concentrating on one thing, so their visual attention was taken away, and what they needed was something that would grab their attention. So something like an auditory signal would have grabbed their attention, and they'd have gone, what's that? Kind of thing. So
So
they'd have then dealt with it, and the plane wouldn't have crashed, probably.
working with a client, and they have a signal when an opportunity has been dwelling longer than the average for the organisation. It shows it's at danger of stalling, and that automatically flags that up to the salesperson who's responsible. And I think on the dashboards is why I strongly recommend, when people are working with Salesforce, CRMs like Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics, that they separate out shorter term forecast reviews, which probably focus on the current sales period, the current sales quarter, from longer term pipeline. So separate those two meetings out. Review forecast, which is short term, but also review pipe. Sometimes on alternating weeks is a good recommendation. So it means you're not neglecting the short term or the longer term. And I think also, your point, Graham, what sort of dashboards have you got showing you new business, but also existing business? Because if you're neglecting your existing business at this time, you're in danger of losing it. And you can't fill a bath with the plug out. So no matter how much new business you're bringing in, if it's dropping out the bottom, then that's so something around timing on there, dashboard wise, existing versus new, forecast versus pipe. Anything else? I mean, outside of CRM dashboards.
I've always liked the very simple sales process of suspects, prospects, customers, and key accounts. And if you think about those 4 key categories, maybe it's a time to get the sales team together to say, well, in each of those 4 areas, what are the needles and dials that we need to be looking at for each of those suspect, prospect, customer, and key account categories? And maybe as a result of that, you might end up with 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, probably no more than that, but they could be absolutely critical then in the way that the business moves forward.
The trouble is that exactly what happens there is that people then get caught up with, for example, suspects, and they focus on that, missing the alarm signal about their key accounts because they're too focused. And this comes down to training. And I think for sales managers and sales directors, I think one of the most important things is training. Because if you think about the pilot example, the reason they don't miss the signals is because they're trained and they get into a routine. They look at, they get in the plane, they check this, they press that button, they do this. It's automatic. They don't even know they're doing it, but they've been trained to the nth degree, having repeated these habitual behaviours thousands and thousands of times. They don't miss the signals. And so that's down to training. They can't take off unless they've done all these things in sequence. And they do that for every journey, time after time after time, and it's automatic. Whereas a salesperson has training going, well, what you've got to do is remember these, 4 key people, get on with it. We need a routine established in training that gets them to, every morning do this at 9 o'clock and this at 9:10 and so on. And it's a routine in salespeople. It becomes a habit, and that's why they miss the signals, because they've not got any habits about checking everything they need to check.
I agree with that. I think the slight problem at the moment, though, is that people have not been in this current world. And although you're right, there is a responsibility on the sales pilot being trained to look for these things. I think there's more of a responsibility now on the sales director sitting in the control tower, and the sales director may be saying, okay, today is Monday, we're going to look at this dial. Tomorrow is Tuesday, we're going to look at this dial. On Wednesday, we're looking at this. On Thursday, we're going back to the one we looked at on Monday because it's more important than any other. And really being quite directive until people get the hang of that. And then, of course, as you say, Graham, it becomes a habit thereafter, doesn't it?
Well, that is also, a lot of the time when I'm working with clients, we work with the sales managers on establishing a coaching cadence, exactly like Phil is saying, which starts to make it become a habitual, disciplined process that occurs. And actually, the more disciplined it is, the less onerous it becomes over time, because everything's in place. That's and discipline. Discipline gives you freedom is an expression I picked up from I think it was the book Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, the two Navy SEALs. But the more disciplined your sales team are, the more freedom they get, basically, because you're not having to badger them for things. So I think where your focus goes, your people's focus goes. I'm just mindful. I guess some sales directors, some sales managers might be saying, hang on a minute, how do I keep focusing, keep all of this in mind? And I think Phil's suggestion is you don't have to keep it all in mind. I'm reminded, and Phil, you've been to Sandhurst, John Adair's stuff, the leadership guy who talks about the 3 spheres of reference, that a good leader will rotate their focus through 3 spheres of reference. They'll look at the task to be achieved, they'll look at each individual person in the team, and they'll look at how the team dynamics and the team's working, like 3 concentric circles overlapping. Sort of, and that's a wonderful. John Adair's just such a genius, because that's so simple to remember. But you just keep shifting. How are we doing on task? How are we doing on revenue delivery? How's Fred doing? How's Julia doing? How's Dave doing? What do they each need? And how's my team collaborating, working together, or also with its wider teams, pre-sales, overlay teams, technical sales? And it's just a genius. It's a very simple thing. Just keep rotating through those spheres, rotating through those dashboard focus areas. If you're doing it consistently, like Phil was suggesting, 1 a day or something, you're never going to miss anything for very long.
No, exactly.
It's having that shift of focus in there that I think is particularly effective. Other thoughts, guys? Any other thoughts before we come to a close?
One other, I think, which we have partially covered. I think if I was a sales director, I would not just be looking for alarm signals. I would be looking for things that are working well, because the sales team needs to do stuff in order to maintain those things that are working well. And by also switching the emphasis to things that are working well, that's good for morale. It's good for the motivation of the team. It's not all doom and gloom. We need to keep the things that are working well whilst we're fixing the others.
And also, I think, a lot of organisations have had to be quite innovative and creative of late, and there might be some new practices that have emerged out of that pressure, I suppose, out of the challenge, that you might want to make sure you don't lose going forward. So make sure what's working well is not, because unless a system is maintained, it tends to disintegrate or decay. But also your team have probably come up with some very clever, innovative ways to get around some of the current challenges. Make sure you don't lose them, because out of necessity has probably come some great creativity and innovation. Yeah,
absolutely.
Professor Jones, as we like to refer to you.
I would just say that I remember many years ago meeting an aviation psychologist, and he spent his life studying the psychology of pilots. And I remember him telling me that actually getting them to stop making mistakes and missing out problems is down to 2 things. And it's down to designing the environment in which they sit, such that their attention doesn't wane and is focused on the right things at the right time. And it's down to training. And those are the 2 key things. And I think that if we want our sales staff not to miss a signal, then actually it's down to the sales director really to ensure that the dashboard and the environment and everything they have is designed properly for them, and that they're trained properly. And those 2 things will mean that your staff won't miss the signals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that training doesn't just mean how to set up an opportunity in Dynamics or Salesforce. It means how to use the data that's in there effectively. Often the training is how to start it, the technical bits and pieces about using it rather than the actual implementation and integration of it. So that's definitely something to do. Well, thank you chaps for that. So folks, hopefully that's given you some food for thought and some frames of reference for you to consider to have in place. There's about 150 plus episodes from the Sales Chat Show now in our back catalogue. All of those are available for you from wherever you get your podcast from, so you can subscribe to the Sales Chat Show wherever you prefer. And we just, in the meantime, want to wish you good luck and good selling in these challenging times. And most importantly, make sure you and yours stay safe. Thanks very much. You have been listening to an episode of the Sales Chat Show. To stream or download a host of further free episodes that will power your sales success, please visit saleschatshow.com. Thank you very much for listening to this episode, and from everyone here at the Sales Chat Show, we'd like to wish you good luck and good selling.